And yeah, ah, it looks as if we have
We're
achieved
live.
liveness.
Yay. We're live.
We're live.
Hi, everybody.
Yes,
I don't see it yet,
I,
but
I don't see you yet either.
there it is.
There you are.
So let's look forward and
Okay.
how can we see each other?
How can we see each other? Like this.
Okay,
We're
there we
still
are.
messing around with this, and we're about to start recording. Boom! Record on this computer. And welcome to Life Writing Live here on Wednesday, the 8th of July.
I'm Stephen Barnes.
I'm Tanana Reeve Dew, the lovely and talented Tanana Reeve Dew.
The hot and sexy Stephen Barnes. So, how are you? Hope everybody's having a great, gosh, what is this? Wednesday. The weeks are longer. It feels like Friday, doesn't it?
Well, in some ways it feels like everything is taking forever. In other ways, it feels like life is just flying by. It's just, it's, if I wasn't getting so much done, I'd be scared at how fast things seem to be moving, but simultaneously feeling like we're stuck in a glacier. So what we wanted to do was to bring you up to date. We want to do these talks twice a month.
Yeah,
every other week, and talk about writing and life and art and the way these things all connect. So let's see. Let me take a look at my page over here, and you take a look at the other page over there.
I see it.
You see it?
Yeah.
Okay, great, fantastic. That is my page.
We just want to make sure we're streaming to the places we want to be streaming, which is to my
Facebook
page and Steve's Facebook page.
Hello, Brian Scott.
The Life Writing page and lots of pages.
Lots of pages. So listen, we're going to do it like this. We're going to talk generally about the different projects that we have going on, just to kind of let you have a sense of what our lives are like right now. Then we're going to talk about some specific tools. I find it very useful to discuss specific tools that we use. There are so many different tools, and some of them are going to be of use, and some of them you may not have heard of. So that's what I wanted to do today. This is just a pop-up. We didn't warn you. We didn't tell you that this was going to happen. We're still testing the technology. I think that we've solved some things at this point. Yes. So let's talk. So T, why don't you talk about what you're working on right now?
Well, a lot of you know, if you follow me on Facebook, that I finally finished my novel that I've been working on for 7 years.
Yay!
The Reformatory, which that is a lot. And what's interesting, some of you may have experienced this, when you finish a long-term project, you actually miss being down in the muck with it. Not just the writing of it, although in a novel, especially a 7-year novel, it's like a world you moved into. And then when you send it off for feedback, you have to find somewhere else to be creatively. So luckily, Steve and I had finished a treatment for a spec horror script called Kitchers we've been working on for a while now, and we're ready to, and Steve had gone through his first pass. Yeah. So I was able to go and work on that. And now I'm actually getting into it. Like I'm doing like 7 pages a day of rewriting and texturizing. And
this is good. And I'm staying out of it, that when she's in this place, she can be a little shy. I think it's like there's a little girl, like a little 12-year-old girl inside her that is doing this work. And I want to make sure that little girl feels completely honored and safe and can mess up if she's going to mess up, or have fun if she's going to have fun. And when you're ready for me to look at it.
Yeah, well, there are times I've heard questions like today. I thought about cutting something and saving that for a later reveal. And you thought that was a good idea. And we were talking about it. But it's true, my process, especially when I have such a strong foundation under me, like we had a good treatment that already worked at the treatment level. We had beta readers, omega and gamma readers. We had beta readers look at our treatment.
Beta epsilon readers.
We knew that it was a fairly solid story, which is, that's the hardest thing in screenwriting, is to make sure you have a solid story. But like I said, Steve had already gone through for a pass, and just wherever he felt like it and however he felt like it, started executing the treatment, creating dialogue. We always save that for last.
Yeah, that's part of what I do is we create a treatment in Google Doc. And we just kind of, beat it out. And I like to make the first treatment no more than 3 pages, just really have that compression. But then once we agree upon the basic structure of the story, then Go ahead.
I was going to say sometimes I have to expand it out before I can contract it back. You know, like I can't see the ending before I can see the middle, right?
Right.
So we've been through that, but we went through that process and we
We went
finally
through that
did our
process.
3-pager and we were happy
And
with
then
it.
we started, I think it expanded out to 9, 10, 11 pages, something like that. Then what I would do is once we've agreed on that more expanded outline, I would take that and transplant that into Writer Duet,
Yes.
and then once it's in Writer Duet, I'd share it with her. And then I'd start looking over, just reading through it. I'm not really trying to do anything, but there are times when you will synopsize dialogue. He tells her that they're going to
Right.
the store.
Right.
Okay, so I would actually break that out into a bit of dialogue. We're going to the store, and with the character's name,
and that's the first draft, and then you might look
Yeah.
at it again and be like, "Hey, I'll be right back." You know.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you're literally
you make it more and more conversational and less on the nose as you write.
My sense is that I'm looking for what I call the low hanging fruit. What are the
Yes.
changes from one format to another that are the easiest to see? Because what I want is the idea of writing a complete project can be a little bit terrifying, but just working on the little bits that are there to be worked on, that's just fun. A real example of that sense of terror was the recently going through the notes on the graphic novel.
Oh yeah, tell them about the graphic novel you're working
Eightfold
on.
Path. So that's one of the things that we're working on.
Let me stop. Steve is working on a graphic novel with National Book Award winner Charles Johnson called The Eightfold Path. That's the we in that sentence. Go on, dear.
Okay. What can I say? I really love working with people.
Yes.
It's a real joy just to play with my playmates, as it were. So I have this, I got all these notes back, on the book, and I'll tell you, it felt like the bottom of my stomach dropped out. I did not like looking at those
Isn't
notes.
that the worst? It's
the worst feeling, because it's that sense of, oh God, it's all going to fall apart. This isn't going to be good, and that happens every time. But because it happens every time, I have a set of processes to deal with that. And the process basically is I print it. I print out the manuscript. I put the notes, if the notes are all together in one mass, then I print those out and put them either at the beginning or at the end. I'll start going through it and I'll make the corrections that I can see, just kind of refamiliarize myself with it, because I will have read over the notes, but I read over the notes without any initial sense of I've got to do these things, especially I don't have to do it in order, because the first time I go through it, I'm going to look, what is the easiest fix I can find? The easiest fix I can find, the things that just seem, almost stupid, just correcting some spelling or something like that. So, and if I do that and then put it aside, what happens is my unconscious mind remembers what the notes were, but it's also gone through the manuscript to make those easy corrections. And as I sleep that night, I will come up with solutions for something that's a little bit harder.
Okay.
So the next day I come and look at it, and the things that looked harder yesterday look easier now.
Right.
So I'll choose the easiest of those.
Right.
And I'll just, and then the next day I'll choose the easiest of the ones that are made, and then the easiest of those. And if I keep doing that, then it's like my unconscious mind is chewing over the hard problems, and it just gives them longer to chew. But I'm not panicking because I'm still getting work done every day.
Right.
And so pretty soon what happens is it just breaks wide open, and there isn't a whole lot left to do. I see how to do everything, and I just execute it.
Yes.
So there's that project as well.
Someone asked on my page, how do we get work done during the pandemic? And my answer was, first of all, I'm very grateful that our son is 16 and not 6. I do think that at the age of 6, without childcare, without outlets for him, and just playing at the park or being with, we would have had a much, much tougher time finding the blocks of writing time. So there's that. We have a certain amount of freedom as the parents of an older child, and it's only the 3 of us in the house.
So, I mean, the pandemic,
especially now that it's summer, might I point out,
the pandemic is stress.
It is stressful.
Okay, and stress is fear. Okay, and so what you have to remember is, first of all, you have to forgive yourself. The feeling that you have that you're walking through mud, that you're carrying, a sack of wet cement on your back, that's real.
Yeah, and I don't want anyone to feel like when we talk about being productive, that means, oh, I should be productive too. What I always say is, if you really feel like you must and want to write, then yes, absolutely find an emotional space, carve little moments of time, find a closet anywhere you can have it like a closed door and privacy for even just 30 minutes a day. Then yes, dig down and do it. But if it's more like a guilt feeling, like you should be, I'm a failure because I'm not, it's not your imagination. These are very, very frightening times. And frankly, just spending time in a garden right now, it sounds like a really healthy response to what's going on if that's where you are.
Now, this is a perfect time for that. Write a sentence a day.
Mm.
If you can do one, if you say, I'm going to write at least one sentence a day, and you do your one sentence, then you need have no guilt if that's all you do that day. You mean no have, and once you remove the guilt, which is another type of fear,
Yes.
your emotional load reduces. Then it's like you can either not do anything or you can do some additional things if you find something that's fun to do.
But the sentence a day is a trick, of course.
It's a trick because you'll probably end up doing more than that, because if you can go through all the steps that you have to go through in order to sit down, get yourself ready, turn on your computer, get to the software,
even think about your project.
That's right.
All.
Then by the time you've gone through all that and you've done one sentence, you're probably going to do 5 or 6 or more.
I mean, but if you do stop at one, you
no guilt
fulfilled your contract.
That's right. So the trick, and the other trick to remember is that emotion is fuel. It's supposed to motivate you to do something. So if you're feeling fear about the pandemic, that can lead to depression if you're not careful, because, depression is fear with no one to fight and nowhere to run. It's just like you're just going to curl up into a ball. Why should I even bother trying? But if you can take that emotion and do something with it, now the fear or the anger, whatever it is being used in the way that you are evolutionarily designed for it to be used. It's fuel on the fire. So you might want the life writing approach is to, what are you afraid of? Write a story about that.
Right.
What are you passionate about? Write a story about that. You actually drive your project with the emotions that you're feeling. And by doing that, you're using that emotion in the way that it was intended to be used. And when you are in action, you don't feel fear.
Right.
You feel fear when you're waiting for the action. Okay. So, you want to engage with it. So I would suggest you exercise, you meditate, you do things that will allow you to connect with your body and your heart and your mind. If you do that and you do that properly, then, the more fear you have, the harder you might have to work out in order to burn off enough of that to get some control. So you're not shaking anymore. So you're not feeling overwhelmed anymore.
Because the fears right now are big. The fears are big, like literally. These are some fears that perhaps you yourself have had recently. The world is ending. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
We're all going to die. Does that sound familiar? Our country is in ruins. Does that sound familiar?
The world will never forgive us.
Now, look, these are all, I understand where these fears are coming from. And yeah, there's a lot of really, really sad, tragic, horrible, criminal stuff going on right now. But the world is not ending. And this country is still here, right? We're still here. We may not recognize some aspects of it in the mirror right now, but it is still here. So just know that in your bones, okay?
And also know that you're needed, that the world needs leaders. And the only way you can lead other people is to lead them from the front, is to take them. You can't take people someplace you have not been. So it behooves you, for the sake of your family, your neighborhood, your community, our nation, our world, that you learn how to handle your emotions with grace. Because, if you've got kids and they're looking at you asking, should I be afraid? Should I be terrified? Is this the end of things? If you
like,
yeah, but if you can explain to them that human beings have been through pandemics many times in our history, we come out the other side, that there are tragedies that happen during this period of time, and people's true character is revealed.
That's for sure.
But we will get through all this. Many of us will. And my position is, I am committed that my family is going to get through this. I'm committed that your family is going to get through this. This is one of the reasons why we do these talks, to be able to connect you to, people who are working or just as scared as you are, just as, we're dealing with the same issues, but we also love each other. and we have each other's backs, and we have our creative work, and we have a community.
Right. So there's gratitude is a big part of my practice right now. I do a morning ritual every morning. If you're part of life writing, you know about that, having a morning ritual. So a lot of it is in boosting myself so that I do have the energy and the joy, that comes from writing for me. But let's just keep it really real for a second. I also weaponize my fear.
How do you do
Okay.
that?
Well, like for instance, when I was working on the reformatory, I had a writing chart. I was trying to write 3 to 5
Right.
daily, and then the pandemic happened, and I stopped writing for a while. And I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, so I literally thought many mornings.
Want to show them your chart?
Not right now, though.
Okay.
But when I woke up with a scratchy throat, I was just convinced. You know that feeling when you're convinced you have COVID, or for those of you who may have had COVID, you're convinced COVID is going to kill you, right? It's just that in your bones certainty that I was going to die within the next 6 weeks, which was a new feeling for me. As a horror writer, I've always had kind of a morbid sense of mortality, but COVID made it immediate. Like in 6 weeks, because of this throat,
right,
you could be dead. And guess what?
What?
It inspired me to write.
Oh, okay.
It inspired me to write. It's like, because I've been working on this novel for 7 years, I would be damned if I was going to get that close and not finish it.
That's true.
Before I die of COVID.
And she isn't kidding about that. We had conversations about how I'd finish that book for her if something happened to her. How I would
not in any way
channel her voice in order to do that.
And we had talked about another writer he might work with. And
yes.
We had planned it.
That's right.
Planned it. And some of you, it may make you feel better to do that too, right? Just because I found when I was afraid that what made me less afraid was planning. Like if I have COVID, let me clean up, let me sanitize, make sure I don't spread it. Like doing something made me feel less fearful. So that writing became a part of doing something. And now that I'm past that stage, it comes and goes. But now I'm beginning to realize, okay, as long as I do stay in the house, and I have pretty severe limits on my lifestyle right now.
Yeah. We've been to the drive-in movies a couple times.
Yeah, that's it.
That's kind of fun.
And I got popcorn one time, and it scared me. I don't want to do it again. Nobody was social. I mean, it was like they had the mask, but people can't count to 6 feet. Why can't people count to 6 feet? But anyway,
they're from Munchkin Land.
You all know what I'm talking about. But so if you really want to be writing, but you are also fearful and you're struggling with that, weaponize that fear. Put it in your writing, whether it's the subject matter, like, oh, you think this is bad? Well, how would it be if it were 10 times worse? Write that story. Or how do you want it to be? Write that story. Right. Or your work in progress, dust it off, go back and to the first chapter and write it to the writer you are now that you are 3 years later.
How do you imagine this is all going to end? Talk about write a story set 5 years after this happens. How will society change? Because implicitly you're saying it's going to end. Yeah. We're going to get through this if you do that. So just, art can save your life, and art can save your heart. And if you put your emotions into your art, then you're creating a bridge to other people. The other people are going to read that, and maybe it will help them in a moment when they're feeling like they have no hope.
Find your reasons if you must write. But I want to reiterate again, not everybody needs to be writing right now. And if it makes you feel unhappy to think about writing, if it makes you feel worse about yourself, that you're not being the writer you want to be, then maybe it is time for a break, because part of this period is learning how to appreciate the small things that are right within our reach, that we don't like refinishing a bathroom that's always been, but this is a time for like improvement projects, cleaning out the closet, like all that stuff we didn't do because we were in traffic and we were at work. so there's also time for that, and that's okay. Yeah, you'll come back to the writing, but if you want to write, we got some
God bless you.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to write, and that's the other part, once we talk about the human aspect of this, the emotional aspect, the thing that doesn't really get talked about in most writing classes, which is the emotional component of what it is you're doing. In some ways, the emotional component is the most important component, because if you read and write and keep your emotions straight, you just keep doing the work, you'll keep getting better.
Absolutely.
Just so what we want to offer you are some analytical tools. So every time that we do this, there are a couple things that I want to do to shift this, is that we want to start reading stories that you guys write, especially if you're on our Life Writing Premium group, because we can't do this just for everybody, but we can do this for that group that we are providing some closer mentorship to.
www.lifewritingpremium.com. Okay. So
So we'll be doing some of that. So we'll talk about how we will.
We're looking for short stories, though.
Short stories,
5 pages maximum.
5 pages maximum. So that it needs to be the whole story, so that we can really see how you're doing things. But I thought that we would start with the notion: what is a story? Address that.
Let's go.
So
what the heck is a story?
Many years ago, the first writing book, the first nuts and bolts writing book I ever remember reading was called Techniques of the Selling Writer by Dwight V. Swain. It was published by the University of Oklahoma Press. And Jerry Pornell pointed it out to me, said, buy this book, Steve. And I did, and I read it, many, many times. I've owned multiple copies of it, and I've given some copies away. Now, Dwight Swain, who's no longer with us, I've read one of his books, and I saw a movie that he'd written, and he was not a great writer, but he really understood the nuts and bolts of what the thing was. And one of the things he does, if you were to ask somebody what is a story, you'd get a number of different answers. Something with a beginning, middle, and an end. Well, that describes a piece of string.
This true. Burn.
So Dwight Swain came up with the first description of a story that I heard that made sense to me. I've heard others that are more complex and others that are simpler since then. But what he said was, you have situation, character, objective, opponent, disaster. Your situation is the world as it is when the story begins. The character is your major viewpoint character, generally the person who can bring the situation to the end of the line. The objective is what your character wants. The opponent, or the obstacle, is what stops your character from being able to get it. And the disaster is what threatens the character if they cannot solve the situation. If you can get these 5 things, you can figure these 5 things out, you can write, that you've got the basics you need to write a story. So let's say with the original Star Wars, A New Hope, situation, suddenly thrust into an intergalactic rebellion. Character, farm boy Luke Skywalker. Objective, wants to be a great Jedi warrior like his daddy. But little does he know that opponent, Grand Moff Tarkin, because Tarkin was the major opponent in that first film. Disaster is hunting the rebellion with the galaxy's ultimate weapon, of the planet-destroying Death Star. So if you break that down, if you know the basic situation, and by the way, I'm not dogmatic about this. There'll be other ways of looking at that movie. And if some of you guys, want to suggest movies, I'll break it down in the same. I've seen that movie. I'll break it down for you in the same way, just spontaneously on the air, so you can see, that this can be done with anything. What it is, you would need to know kind of what the steady state situation is. You need to know who you're writing about. You need to know what they want. You need to know what stands in their way. And you need to know what is the ticking clock. What's going to go wrong if this person cannot solve the problem? So,
really, one way to
you had some very, very useful things to say about that.
Objective and opponent, is huge. You'd be surprised. I work with a lot of learning writers, and you would be surprised how many stories, even short stories, open with no hint as to what the protagonist wants.
Right.
And therefore, how would we know, even if we're right in front of us, what's standing in the protagonist's way? And that's how we recognize what a story is. And I think sometimes learning writers feel like story is a series of events. This happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. I mean, and there's a degree of truth to that. But a story is not just a series of events by any means. You have to add the protagonist into that mixture, and that's what creates the story. It's like leaving the eggs and the flour out of your cake if you don't have the protagonist and the objective. And every scene is sort of a mini story. If you're writing a novel, very often I tell people, well, first of all, work on short stories. But if you are working on a novel, then, for the next 2 years while you're working on that novel, break off a piece of your novel as a short story. And it should be fairly easy to do that, because every one of your chapters is its own story.
Right.
There's no chapter that's just treading water, waiting for something more exciting to happen. Which means that in every single chapter, especially the first one, we know who the protagonist is and what they want. Whether we know what they want at that moment and just in that chapter, and it's only related to what they want overall, but they have to want something or there is no story.
There is no story.
And there's something standing in their way, or again, there is no story. Or it might start where it seems like everything is going your character's way, and then by the end of the chapter, there's a downfall, and the opponent reveals itself. So now we know part, or one of, like mini one. It doesn't have to be the main one. So as Robert McKee writes a story, and then I'll let you talk.
No.
As Robert McKee writes his story, and I agree, story is a difficult writing book. I actually prefer his new book, Dialogue, which actually deals more with prose and not just screenplays. But it's in terms of scene construction and understanding how scenes work in relation with each other. It looks like chemistry and sounds like chemistry, and not everybody likes McKee, but there's a lot of truth in what he says. So every single scene, this is how we know we're reading a story, is there's an objective in that scene. It's the scene objective. And it may or may not be directly related to the super objective, which is the objective of the whole piece. But at least we're seeing a glimpse. We're seeing a glimpse of how your character confronts small problems or big problems, or how your character deals with conflict. And those character traits are going to be intact as the story goes on, and the character further reveals. Story is revealed through what the character does in reaction to the events. This happened, and this happened, and this happened.
How the character reacts reveals the character. Okay, in other words, that's the who am I part of it. But how the universe reacts to the character's actions, that reveals the ethical structure of your universe. But those things together, how I react and how the universe reacts to my reactions, that's your story.
Yeah, and a lot of new writers feel like bad thing happens, bad thing happens, bad thing happens is your story. I mean, really, your story could be, one kind of bad thing happens at the beginning, and the thing your character does in reaction to that small bad thing leads to a way worse thing.
Or you could start with a good thing.
Yes.
And then have it turn into a bad thing, or a bad thing and have it turn into a good thing. In general, the energy in your story comes from one charge reversing itself. In other words, something bad and you can end the scene and it's double bad, or it's bad, you end the scene and it's good, or it's good and it becomes very good, or it's good and then it goes bad. But there has to be a change. Drama is the sense of dramatic momentum that you want in a story is based on the charge at the beginning of a scene compared to the charge at the end of a scene. I would strongly suggest that you watch a couple of your favorite movies, back up, watch it, and take a look and see what was the emotional charge at the beginning of the scene.
Negative, positive. Was it starting on a high note and ending on a low note, or starting on a low note and ending on a high note, or in all the variations in between? Everything doesn't have to be broad emotional strokes. But yes, absolutely.
I mean, I remember Kramer versus Kramer. I think that Dustin Hoffman gets a new job opportunity at work. I think he's either an ad man or a lawyer. I think he's an ad man. And he comes home and his wife wants to leave him. Mm-hmm. Meryl Streep says, "I'm leaving you, and I'm dumping the kid in your lap too." So you go from a high, the best day of his life, suddenly to the worst day of his life, and now you have drama. Now you have whiplash the audience, and it's like, whoa, that's very different from starting it's a bad day and then it gets worse. That just makes you want to commit suicide.
And they kind of, there's one story, like you've probably all seen the movie Final Destination, which is about someone who has a vision that a plane is going to crash just before a group of friends get on a flight together. And they go on the flight together and they were all supposed to die and blah, 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 blah. It actually reminds me a lot of my novel, The Between, but I'm not going to dwell on that. Okay, so one version of that story is the people who got on the plane. Right. And in one version of reality, those people did die. That plane was supposed to crash. So that's a very exciting story. There's another story about the kid who would be me, by the way,
who trusted their instincts.
Because I'd be like, oh, word, you had a vision? Bye. Okay.
Right.
So I'm that person who didn't go on the flight. And maybe my story is also an interesting story. How does the survivor feel when they've made a decision, or do I feel like I have some kind of special intuition now?
Right. Of course, in Final Destination, it was Death's design,
Right.
and so
So
if,
it's
so
chasing
the plane blew up anyway, but the kids weren't on the plane, so
Oh.
Death comes after them.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had the whole plot wrong, but that was still a great example. Let's
Yes,
pretend,
it was actually even better example than you knew.
let's pretend
wonderful.
there were people who got on the plane, and there was one person who didn't stay on the plane. But you're right, honey. They all stayed off the plane. But still, different. So you have the same situation. A plane is going to blow up, and the story is what the people do in reaction to that situation.
Okay, so Final Destination situation. When a plane blows up, character, I forget what the girl's name is.
Oh,
objective.
really?
I don't remember what her name was.
Wow.
Do you remember?
The fact that he even thinks he's supposed to remember her name. That's what I can't.
Oh, okay. Final girl. Character,
Yeah,
final girl. Objective wants to find out why she had a vision of the plane blowing up and what it might mean to her future. But little does she know that death, disaster, doesn't like the fact that she cheated him, and he's coming after her. He's going to kill her and all her friends in creative fashions that we will all enjoy.
It's really not that great a story, but it is a story.
But there were some great deaths.
And but also they didn't just like stand around twiddling their thumbs while death is chasing them. They took measures and created bonds and came up with strategies.
And talked to Tony Todd. And failed to say Candyman 3 times.
And so the story is not death. The story is what they're doing in reaction to their situation.
That's right.
Was my point.
So you see that because you have the situation, you know who your character is, you know what they want, which is to survive. That's ultimately. And you know what the opponent is. In this case, it's cosmological. It's a cosmic opponent. It's not a human being. It's the force of death itself personified.
Right.
And the disaster is that escaping from one death merely leads to death and fear. Just leads to long, slow, lingering Rube Goldberg deaths, later on in the movie that were quite entertaining, but still, terrifying in situ.
So just make sure that whatever your primary work is that you're working on, that in your first chapter, I can actually see the seeds of your story, that there is a desire your character has that is I would hope, pretty strong one, because we're starting the book there, right? So it should be a pretty important moment, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a car chase, but it should be a pretty significant moment when you're starting your story there.
Well, it should, speaking about that, a car chase done badly, in other words, if you don't know the people involved, if you don't have an emotional investment, it's just action, it's just stunts, nobody cares. But if you start, let's say, Bad Boys 3, with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, racing through the streets, and you think this is somebody's chasing them. It's this. No, they're coming to the birth of a child. They were rushing to that. Right. So you have now established the character.
That is a perfect example of what we call the oh crap method of opening your story. And when I say oh crap, I hear car chase, but like sometimes it can be a car chase with a purpose. Or it's just a small, some kind of a small conflict. You're running late for work, or you almost got hit by a taxi cab.
Yes.
And because that moment of like heightened anxiety, it doesn't have to be over the top. Then we're writing melodrama. You don't want your character going, why? But because before we know them, or that's a bit much. But some sort of heightened moment of anxiety to reveal their character, how they think, how they plan, the public mask they put on, as opposed to the quiet things they're saying in your interior monologue that isn't in your dialogue, which is where we learn the most about your characters, since we all wear masks all day long.
Now, we start with this on plot, but the truth is that what we really want is to have kind of a free-form conversation.
Okay.
So what you just said was great, that your primary means of establishing character is the action of the characters.
Yeah.
But the secondary means of it is looking at their internal dialogue, because sometimes their internal dialogue or their internal monologue is at variance with their actions.
Yeah.
A person can think that they are courageous and they behave like a coward, or a person can behave in an extremely courageous fashion but think they're a coward. Okay. And if you do that, you then get that conflict between what they are, which is primarily their action, behavior is truth, and their internal representations. Furthermore, you can take it further by looking at what do they say to other people about who they are.
Right.
So we see their behavior, we hear their internal dialogue, we also see what they say to other people about who they are. And you can really create some nice three-dimensional characters that way by really showing their self-image, what they want other people to think about them, who they really are, how they, what do they think about the universe? When they do something, the universe responds. Do they fall apart? Do they take it in stride? What is that? Go.
While you do, of course, want to write with beautiful language all throughout your work, beautiful language alone is not going to convince a reader to keep reading your story. It's just not. So make that beautiful language in service to a story. And the way we know it's a story is that there's a three-dimensional protagonist, and it's just a lot easier to add skin and bones to a skeleton when you have some sort of a minor conflict, anxiety, if possible, another person in the room with them. Now, if there's a reason your character must be alone for 3 chapters, you can make that work. But in some ways, stories don't come to life until your protagonist is in interaction with at least one other person, or perhaps praying or whatever it is. But because of what Steve was just saying, those extra added layers of realism, because guess what? Your reader also puts on a happy face and says one thing and is thinking something else. That I can relate to that. That's human. And your reader also has anxieties, and your reader, also has a complicated relationship with their parent or with their child. So the more you can reflect what readers see as a real person who has a goal, but here's this obstacle, we know we're in a story. So it might not be the obstacle that's going to take us all the way to the end of the book, but what's the obstacle in the first scene? Or how do we know what the goal is in the first scene? Make sure you include that alongside your gorgeous language.
Yeah, well, that actually was so good that I want to start winding things down
sure.
right now.
Can I make an announcement?
Of course.
I know I was like hogging after just a second ago,
No.
but so I'm the executive producer of Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror, which you might, it just happens to be on the wall. Who knew that was there? So it's right there. So in any case, Shudder asked me a few weeks ago to moderate a Comic-Con panel, which I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never been to Comic-Con. It's like, oh wait, there is no Comic-Con, it's virtual. Still though, it's Comic-Con. It's called Comic-Con at Home. It's my absolute first ever Comic-Con appearance. And I moderated Shudder's horror panel. I'm not allowed to say when yet. It's all secret-y, just like regular Comic-Con. But I wanted to announce who was on my panel, because now you'll see why I was so nervous when they asked me to do it. Greg Nicotero from Creepshow, and also The Walking Dead, and the costume master, and now a showrunner on Creepshow. Jamie O'Brien, Nosferatu. I'm hooked on that. We're in season 2. I'm deeply hooked.
You've watched that far, really?
I'm in it.
All right.
And I only started watching it for this panel, to be honest. So yeah, because there's so much TV. How do you keep up? Chucky, Don Mancini, the guy who created Chucky. Like literally the guy who came up with the first movie Chucky. They're doing a Chucky series.
Child's Play, right?
I'm sorry, Child's Play. And what else? The series is going to be called Chucky. Lock and Key, Meredith Averill, and then Nick and Tosca, Channel Zero, which I've watched every season of that show. So they asked me to moderate this panel, and I was so nervous. And to be honest, I had it written at the wrong time on my calendar. So I woke up, I was like, why is everybody texting me about the panel? It's not till 2. It was at 10 in the morning. The panel was at 10 in the morning, and I texted at 8:30. So remind me of the time. They're like, 10. I'm like, oh yeah, good. Meanwhile, so I was so scared, but it was fun, and it turned out great. And that was just announced today.
That was just announced today. Okay, well, great. So we'll keep you posted as to where you'll be able to see that, and so forth and so on. I wanted to remind you again that we're going to be back in 2 weeks. We'll be looking at a short story that one of the Life Writing Premium students did, and we will be giving you information about how you can submit a thumbnail, just like a 1-sentence explanation of what your story is, so that I can pick that and then take a look at stories, so that we can. What we want to do is to take the structural suggestions that we have here and bring them to life with actual examples. And we can't do this for everybody, but we can do this for our life writing. So for some of our life writing,
And
one lucky life writing premium student a month at least.
Yeah, these obviously these webinars are free. They're running on Steve's Facebook page, on my Facebook fan page, on the life writing page, I believe. But for people who do want more information, a deeper dive, and more personal contact, then take a look at www.lifewritingpremium.com. We just posted a video about our whole history together and how we met, and just telling you a little bit more about what that product is. I just compiled basically all of my writing essays and lectures from more than 10 years of teaching. And we've started to integrate those into something you get once a month once you join Life Writing Premium.
That's right. So listen, that's all for right now. We're going to have sushi and enjoy and watch movies and chill for the rest of the evening. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of our family. And, we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Take care. Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. If you feel like writing, write on.